Thank you, everybody. I should answer that question. How confident am I on witnesses? That's a good question. Well, you got your question. Okay. Even though you're over my shoulder, I would say this. We've always known it will be an uphill fight on witnesses and on documents because the president and Mitch McConnell put huge pressure on these folks. But for 4 weeks, we've made the relentless. I've been every day, I think every single day, I have argued why we need witnesses and documents, and we have won over the American people. And so our Republican colleagues, at least some of them, realize that if they are to reject witnesses and documents, they're going against not just a small group or not just Democrats, but against the whole grain of America. And they know that they may be held accountable to that. So I hope we can get witnesses and documents. It's an uphill fight. Is it more like than not? Probably no. But is it a decent, good chance? Yes. Thank you, everybody.
Have any Republicans said that they will vote for witnesses?
Well, I think that's right. I think Professor Dershowitz, when he presented his argument to the Senate, I think it was a powerful argument. And he went through a litany. He listed, I think it was 40 presidents who've been accused of abuse of power, the standard the House managers are setting out. Those included George Washington. They included John Adams. They included John Quincy Adams. They included Thomas Jefferson, who his political rivals said when he made the Louisiana Purchase that it was an abuse of power. And under the House manager's standard, every one of those presidents could have been impeached. That's not what the framers meant for impeachment to be. I also think it was notable, Professor Dershowitz tonight responded to a question I asked, which is there's been a lot of discussion about was there a quid pro quo, wasn't there a quid pro quo? And the question I asked is, as a matter of law, the legal question before the Senate, does it matter if there was a quid pro quo or not? And isn't it true that quid pro quos are often employed in foreign policy? And Professor Dershowitz rightly pointed out that we engage in quid pro quos all the time. That's not the question. The question is whether the president committed a high crime or misdemeanor, and if he's asking for investigation into possible corruption when there's real and credible evidence that there might be corruption, that is not an impeachable offense. Yes.
What evidence do you have that Vice President Biden used his position to benefit Hunter Biden's position on the board? Because that's what Democrats say, there is no evidence for that.
So,
part of your hypothetical question is
absolutely. So we have the best evidence of all, which is Vice President Joe Biden's own words. And we've seen the video, which if your publications have not aired the video, I think it's the most important video in this entire proceeding. It is the video of Joe Biden bragging. And he's proud of this, where he's bragging that he told the president of Ukraine, number one, that he would block $1 billion in foreign aid, American loan guarantees to Ukraine, unless and until he fired the prosecutor who was investigating Burisma. And Joe Biden ends that video. Hold on, let me finish the answer. Joe Biden ends that video with saying, "And son of a bitch, he was fired." Now, Joe Biden is admitting,
but some would
and
say that Biden's actions made it that the corruption was actually looking to more, not less.
That could be, but I'll tell you one institution that didn't say that was the New York Times. The New York Times had reported just weeks earlier that prosecutor was investigating Burisma. And to be clear, look, the House managers have argued there was zero basis to investigate. When you got a guy being paid $1 million a year, and he doesn't know anything about oil and gas, he doesn't have any apparent involvement in Ukraine, that certainly raises the question of corruption. And Joe Biden was the point person for Ukraine, and when he got the prosecutor fired, that happened because, by the way, you want a quid pro quo, the one admitted quid pro quo is what Joe Biden admitted to on film, and that, at a minimum, provided a reasonable basis to say this ought to be investigated.
Senator, but it wasn't just Joe Biden who wanted the prosecutor fired. It was the UK, the EU, the IMF, the World Bank, and a whole bunch of our allies. Are you saying that they were all in on this scheme? And also, can you tell me how many members of ExxonMobil's board have oil and gas experience?
So let's take your question. Look, as far as I know, the UK, the IMF, and other players didn't have a son on the board getting paid $1 million a year. And when it comes to corruption, you know, it is really astonishing to see the House managers talk about cover-up, and at the same time go all in on being desperate to cover up any evidence of Burisma's and Hunter Biden's and Joe Biden's potential corruption. And you know, I saw as I was walking down here that Chuck Schumer, I saw as I was walking down here that Chuck Schumer had said to the press, well, I don't think the Republicans have the votes to call Hunter Biden. That really speaks volumes how desperate Democrats are to block Hunter Biden. Let me tell you, Chuck's wrong on that. I don't know if we will call additional witnesses in addition to the 17 witnesses who already testified in the House proceedings. I don't know on Friday if there will be 51 votes to call yet more witnesses. But I'm confident of this. If there are additional witnesses, if the Democrats get their wish to call John Bolton as the 18th witness in this matter, I am confident we're not going to do the kind of one-sided partisan show that the House did. We're going to be fair to both sides, which means if we call John Bolton, I promise you we're calling Hunter Biden too.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. The New York Times reporter that you mentioned earlier, his name's James Risen. Are you aware that James Risen completely contradicted what you're saying that he said, commenting on this article, that his words have been twisted, the 2015 article?
You know, it's not surprising to see the press engaged in situational ethics, and right now one of the reasons that the American people, I think, have lost trust in a lot of the press is because so many of the press are desperately just repeating whatever the Democratic narrative is. The headline in that New York Times story talked about the vice president, his son, and prosecuting a corrupt Ukrainian company. And the New York Times reported the fact that the prosecutor was investigating Burisma. Now, I get today the media wants to pretend none of that existed. But if you look at Burisma, and by the way, Burisma was a company that was through and through corrupt. If you look at how Burisma was founded, the oligarch that founded Burisma was at the time the sitting energy minister of Ukraine. So he granted gas licenses to his own company and got incredibly rich through corruption. Now, why is that relevant? Because A, everybody knew Burisma was corrupt. This was common knowledge. It was such common knowledge that Chris Hines, the stepson of John Kerry, terminated doing business with Hunter Biden and with Devin Archer, his college roommate, because when they went on the board of Burisma and were taking $1 million apiece, he said it's unacceptable to work for Burisma. John Kerry's son-in-law could tell that, but yet at the same time, Joe Biden was perfectly happy to remain the decision maker on Ukraine policy. That raises real questions of corruption.